Have you wondered about living elsewhere after you retire? Well, we have, almost daily. As you know, it's not an overnight decision. Hi, this is Gil
and Gene
of Retire There, a podcast about places to consider living in during your retirement. We started this program for selfish reasons. We planned on visiting cities earlier this year, spending some quality time, not as tourists, but pretending to actually live there to get a real sense and flavor of the place. We made one trip earlier this year, which was great, and we were planning for the next trip.
Then COVID hit.
Yes, unfortunately. A little background about us. I'm Asian, born in Brazil, South America, and grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn. I'm an engineer turned attorney and practicing higher ed law at a college who loves working with students, faculty, and staff.
I'm not Asian. Born and raised in Long Island, New York, a place I've always wanted to leave. I'm a law librarian working in a court who loves his job. We've lived in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn for many years and have been thinking about our future home.
So we will be speaking to folks from around the country who have moved to venues of their dreams and more, and we will share their intimate secrets.
Whoa.
Just kidding. But we will offer information that you may not find anywhere else. So stay tuned. In today's episode, we bring you, drum roll, the Big Apple. Barbara and Lou Grumet met in law school. They've been married 52 years, have 2 daughters and 3 granddaughters. Female power. For 25 years, they raised their children and worked in Albany, New York. In the late 90s, they moved to Riverdale, a neighborhood in the Bronx of New York City. In 2011, the Grumets sold their Bronx home and made a big decision to retire to Manhattan. As we are told, this is where they intend to stay, COVID or not.
Lou Grumet grew up in West Virginia, attended George Washington University, NYU Law School, and earned a master's in public administration from the University of Pittsburgh. He held important positions with the state of New York. In Albany, the state capital, he was Assistant Commissioner for Children with Handicapping Conditions of the Educational Department and CEO of the School Boards Association. Then, in New York City, he was CEO of the State Society of Certified Public Accountants. Wow. And after Lou retired, he authored a book titled The Curious Case of Curious Joel, The Rise of a Village Theocracy and the Battle to Defend the Separation of Church and State, which earned 4.5 stars from Amazon.
Wow.
He has done other writing and likes to mentor young people about their futures.
Now, Barbara Grumet grew up in Pittsburgh and Chicago, attended Denison University in Ohio and NYU Law School. Her career included being a research associate in law and psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh. She took a break from work to be at home with her children until they were school age. Barbara then worked for 20 years at Russell Sage College as a faculty member and dean of the graduate school. While in Albany, she served on several nonprofit healthcare boards. Thereafter, she became associate provost at the Westchester campus of Long Island University. Then she became executive director of the National League of Nursing Accrediting Commission, and then dean at the School of Professional Studies at New York City College of Technology, a college within the City University of New York. Since retirement, she has been a volunteer for SCORE, a national nonprofit that mentors people starting or running small businesses. And Barbara is currently serving as chairperson of the New York City chapter. She's also on the CUNY Institutional Review Board, an entity that reviews grants within higher education. What can I say? At this point, I am out of breath. I am so intimidated by these two that I don't think I can go on.
Yeah,
okay.
I agree.
But we will. We will. Mr. and Mrs. Grumet, would you kindly walk us through your journey in how you came to choose Manhattan, the Big Apple, to retire in?
Sure. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Sure. Sometime in 2010, for a number of reasons, I became paralyzed from the waist down and wasn't able to walk and wasn't able to stand. And at the time, we lived in a three-bedroom home, a single-family home in the Riverdale section of the Bronx. We love New York. We have always intended to spend the rest of our lives in New York. New York is a perfect retirement community. But I couldn't get around. And we had two standard poodles, and that was another issue in terms of where we lived. And so we began to look around where I could have a full life. Barbara could continue working. By all accounts, that was Midtown. And Midtown sounds to the public perception as the most expensive place in America, but it's actually not. If you think about it, when you live in Midtown in a co-op, as we do in an apartment, a two-bedroom apartment, we have no car. We sold our car. We have no auto insurance. We have no snow removal. We have no lawn pickup. We have no grass mowing. We have no fixing the roof or fixing the various things, like the furnace that happen in a single family home. We actually find that we're spending probably a third less to live in 2 blocks from Central Park than we did living in the North Bronx.
Wow.
That's
And
shocking.
it is shocking, but it's true. And we know other people who have moved into the city, and it's true for all of us, but only if you sell your car and you do all those things. We don't have a second home because of the various aspects of the reasons that I was paralyzed. I'm unable to fly. We wanted to have a full life, and Manhattan gives us a full life. I've learned how to walk again, and we walk to Broadway. We see a lot of Broadway. Well, when there was a Broadway, we would see, approximately 20 shows a year. We walk to Lincoln Center. We walk to the various museums. We walk in Central Park several times a day. And when we had our dogs, it was a great place we discovered. After being afraid to bring the dogs in, we discovered the dogs loved it. As one of our granddaughters once said to us after we moved here, "Grandpa, you live near everything." And, I grew up in West Virginia. If the worst thing that happens to me is I spend the rest of my life in Midtown Manhattan, it is the most wonderful experience in the world. There's everything to do here, and it's not as costly as you would think.
Yeah, we were, when we did move, one of the decisions we made from a financial perspective is to hopefully be able to find an apartment in Manhattan that would allow us to have no mortgage, have the cost of selling our home in the Bronx cover the cost of going into the apartment. And we were able to do that. So we now have a monthly maintenance fee as part of belonging to a co-op. But as Lou said, the expenses for that are considerably below what we were paying in our home in Riverdale.
I forgot to mention our heating costs are less than 1/4 of what they were in a single family home.
Wow.
Wow.
So, there's just a lot of expenses. And one of the things I would encourage your listeners to think about is to, if you're still living in a home, start listing all the things you pay for on a week to week or month to month basis that you may not think about because they're just so automatic a part of your life in a single family home. You find out you're spending a lot more to live in that single family home than you may have thought, even if you've already paid off your mortgage. Our experience has been that by the time you pay off the mortgage, that's when the maintenance kicks in, and so you're still paying to maintain your home expenses that you may not have encountered earlier on. So, from a financial perspective, I think it works out really well. We had always thought when we first moved back to Manhattan, and both of us were still working, that after we both retired, after we no longer had dogs, that we would at that point decide that it was no longer fun to go through the hassles of maintaining a home and keeping up a home, and that we would relocate to an apartment. So Lou's disability sort of accelerated that process for us. But it's one that we had always sort of had in the back of our heads as a long-term goal anyway.
So something else having nothing to do with money that's wonderful about being in Midtown Manhattan, particularly since I can't travel, is that everybody can see us. Everybody comes to Manhattan. And those people who live far away like to come to Manhattan. And we have a sofa bed. And another huge advantage is that our children and our grandchildren live One of them lives in Queens and the other lives in Brooklyn, and we're all on the F line. So we get to see everybody. And I think one of the problems I think some people have in retirement is they go to a retirement community, and lovely as it is, they get totally isolated. We're not at all isolated. We have extremely vibrant lives, and we don't have to pre-plan anything. We just have to walk outside.
Well, first I want to say congratulations, Lou, that I cannot believe you were recovered from your paralysis. That's outstanding.
Amazing,
and wonderful. And you're right. I think that people love to come to New York. You're not isolated in any sense. One of my fears is I've grown used to my entire life growing up in Brooklyn, basically, all the foods, all the diversity. And, when I think about leaving New York City, where will I find all that? And is food important? Well, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Especially if you have a varied palate or you're used to.
Right. Well, one of the things that we discovered living in an apartment is that a major form of entertainment is eating out with friends. And we've made a lot of friends in the building, and we also continue to have friends, who we had before we moved. And so people eat out a lot. And I think one of the reasons, at least in this building, is most of our friends come from households where they don't like to cook. So it's a lot easier to go out because then you don't have to reciprocate by hosting somebody in your home when you don't like to cook, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things we've discovered from the lockdown, like lots of people, is people discover that their expenditures have gone way down. And we were shocked when we started looking at our budgets at how much money we had spent eating out, because, we would eat out 2 or 3 times a week. Lou and I would have lunch separately with friends. So
that and Broadway were our 2 biggest expenditures.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just really, but I agree with you that eating out and having an opportunity to experience all the wonderful opportunities in New York City is something that we really enjoy and embrace and miss because of the COVID lockdown, of course. But also, having lived in a smaller community upstate and talking to friends who have retired to other places, the variety is not as wide and rich and deep as you would find in New York. But I think that's for many people, no matter where you retire to.
That's true in 2 ways. Number one, even with the COVID lockdown, and even with the diminution of Broadway and the cultural affairs, we still have access to a whole lot of things just by walking outside our door. The fact that 1/3 of the restaurants may be closed, the other 2/3 are still open. And they may be open out on the street, but that's something wonderful about New York. So you sit in the middle of 56th Street and have a great meal instead of sitting inside. And another aspect is, Barb was mentioning friends in the building. We've lived in a number of single-family homes in upstate New York and in North Bronx, and never knew most of our neighbors because we were always so busy with our jobs and our kids. Here, we're in a building with all age groups, but the people are fascinating. And we have a number of people who live in our building merely because they're retired and it's on the same block as Carnegie Hall. And they want to walk to Carnegie Hall. So we have some of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life living in my building.
That's great. It's funny, you talk about the cost of living. And it seems that if you can afford the real estate there, people don't realize if you look around, you can find restaurants that aren't so expensive. And I find I love, I was a punk rock kid, and I still once in a while go to shows in New York. They're really inexpensive. It's not like, I don't go to Madison Square Garden to see, Elton John or whatever. I go to small clubs. They're inexpensive, so much fun. There's so many things to do in New York that are free or inexpensive. And I think a lot of people don't realize that.
You're absolutely right. And even just spending an afternoon walking around and exploring neighborhoods is something that's a lot of fun for people. I think for people who have lived in the suburbs and have relied on cars for most of their commuting, and we certainly did that when we lived in Albany as well, the transition to walking everywhere or perhaps taking public transportation is something that people don't always appreciate. But you get really spoiled. We can walk where we are. We're within a mile of almost anything we want to do, and we're able to walk the mile. And if we want to go for longer walks, we can do that. We can go to shopping. We can go to the theater. We can go up to the to cultural institutions, walk through Central Park, which is, as Lou mentioned, we're just a block or two away. So for us, this is the ideal spot for us to live.
And one of the things about New York that's fascinating, let's just take Central Park. We've lived here since 2011, and we go to Central Park once or twice a day, and we always find something new, and it's always free. I mean, just knowing that all those bridges in Central Park are different, there's no identical design in any two bridges. I happen to be an amateur photographer, not a very good one, but an amateur photographer. There is an infinite possibility within Central Park, just the architecture of New York, and I love architecture, just walking around, looking at buildings and learning their history can be an entire avocation, and it's become one.
Have you seen the owl in Central Park?
No, we have not.
The owl, I'm not sure which one. We saw the story about the owl in the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree, which is also, by the way, 5 or 6 blocks away from our house.
And we watched them put it up. We walked down and watched them put
it up. So that was fun. We weren't there when they rescued the owl, but we did. But we have seen in Central Park there is a lot of wildlife, which is really interesting. Just like Prospect Park in Brooklyn. So in the summer, for example, there's a great heron that has lived in a pond that's 2 blocks away from us, has been there the last couple of summers, and we've seen that heron stalk fish and then swoop down and ingest them. It ain't a pretty sight, but it's kind of fascinating to see how he, grabs the fish and it slides right down his gullet. and there's other wildlife as well. So if people are interested in nature, just within Midtown Manhattan, there are opportunities to explore, and there's a park that on both the east side and the west side of Manhattan, there are walkways that go almost the entire length of Manhattan Island now. So you could go for a walk and right on the river. If you're into bike riding, you can ride your bikes. The one thing that one of my minor annoyances now is all these bike lanes that are springing up, but they're wonderful for those who like to enjoy bike riding.
It's interesting. We live on 57th Street, which means we live on the street that have 4 tallest buildings in North and South America. And we get to watch them construct them. And if you want to return to being an 11-year-old boy, you just stand there and watch them build a 110-story building, especially when the crane falls down. But it's just fascinating. And Barb was talking about wildlife watching. I'm a people watcher. I enormously love to walk up and talk to the pedicab drivers outside of Central Park. You get to discover what it's like to live in Afghanistan, what it's like to live in the various different stands, what it was like to live in the Russian Empire. These very aggressive kids who have come over here at the age of 17 or 18 so they could learn English. They may or may not have their green cards. I don't ask. It's none of my business. But they talk to me and give me a connection and a sense of what it's like in the rest of the world that you can't get anywhere else in America just by walking a block from my house.
That's amazing.
All right. Can you guys talk a little about healthcare and if that played a factor in your moving to Manhattan?
Well, the nice thing about healthcare is that we're both within walking distance of our primary care providers.
And those are different hospitals.
And in two different hospital systems, because Manhattan has world-class hospitals and healthcare systems. And of course, one of the things that's happening in healthcare that, this was my area of academic interest when I was in higher education. So I still sort of watch it from afar. And the hospitals are in a big, continuing their gobbling up other providers and private physicians' offices. But the reality is it makes it very, very easy to access healthcare. All of the big healthcare systems are really encouraging primary care practices. So you can find a primary care provider that will allow you access to a network of specialists and subspecialists and diagnostic facilities and hospitals and ambulatory care facilities. Manhattan is a great place to retire. If you have Medicare, almost all the providers take Medicare. And if the one that you're looking at doesn't, somebody else will because of the competition. And so it's very easy to find a healthcare provider and a whole network of specialists.
Just to give you some feel for people who don't know Manhattan, Barb and I live within 3/4 of a mile in one direction from Mount Sinai Roosevelt, and about 3/4 of a mile in the other direction from Columbia Presbyterian. Wow.
Nice.
And in between, lest you think that's too far, there's a city MD.
Thank God for those city MDs. Yeah, I agree. The healthcare is world class, and for many listeners, what Barbara mentioned was very true in the sense that these hospitals and larger healthcare institutions are gobbling each other up, and at the end, so long as we are able to weed through all that and find the people that we need, and there's no shortage, right? There's no shortage, and the fact that you can walk to both places is amazing. It's just unheard of.
It's very convenient, and you get spoiled. But not having to get in a car and drive to a healthcare provider when you're feeling terrible is a real advantage.
Yeah.
Let me mention something else for prospective retirees. We're within walking distance of the Metropolitan Museum. We're within walking distance. We're 2 blocks from MoMA. We're in the Museum of Modern Art. We're several blocks, and from the New York Historic Society. The reason I'm telling you that is not only because we go there a lot, but what we don't take advantage of, but a number of our friends do, is every one of those institutions I mentioned runs either free or very cheap world-class presentations almost every day. And we have friends who live in this building who seem to spend their entire lives in these adult learning presentations. And you can do that, and it doesn't cost very much money.
Yeah, that's the thing about living in New York City. You can learn anything, whether it's a language or a musical instrument or to learn an art.
Yeah,
it's just amazing.
Yeah,
that's absolutely correct. And of course, as a former CUNY employee, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we're also about a 15 or 20 minute block from one of the CUNY campuses. So probably a 25 or 30 minute block from several of the CUNY campuses, which also offer a lot of continuing education programs and lecture series for those who are interested. If there is space, which is getting harder and harder within CUNY, seniors are allowed to audit courses. But the point is that there are lots of opportunities for learning, within the CUNY system, but also within the other major universities. Columbia, NYU, Fordham, Cornell all have major presences in Manhattan, offer different kinds of programs, performances. Since you mentioned, Gene, the opportunity to go to artistic performances, exhibitions of art that is created by students. So there are lots of ways for you to get out and about and not have to spend a lot of money. And then if you want to spend money on, Lou mentioned our major indulgence when it's open is Broadway and Lincoln Center performances. Those too have opportunities for reduced cost tickets if people are interested in finding cheaper ways to enjoy that kind of entertainment as well.
And for any prospective retirees who love animals, as I mentioned, we had 2 standard poodles, we had a Labradoodle, we had 2 sets of dogs, and so it's a wonderful place for pets. One of the reasons we moved to Riverdale to start with was we were afraid we couldn't have pets in Manhattan. We were wrong. Our pets love Central Park. Our pets love people. People loved our pets.
And our building was what they call a pet-friendly building. So we wouldn't have been able to move in if they weren't. But the point is that there are more and more opportunities for people who have pets to relocate. If you either buy a condo or buy into a co-op that is what they call pet-friendly, it's very easy. And of course, there's access to good veterinary care here as well. There are pet animal care emergency rooms. Cornell's veterinary school is here, so that there are a lot of sub specialists. If you have an animal who has a particularly complex medical condition. And there are also a lot of practices, private practices of veterinarians who have offices just like they do in the suburbs or in smaller towns.
And a wonderful way to meet people is to have a dog at the end of a leash. We made many friends, people we met in Central Park, because you'd see them every day, and you get, first of all, to recognize the dog, and then after a while you recognize the owner. And after a while you discover that he has a world-class art collection, and he invites you up to see it.
Wow.
That's a true story. That really happened.
I bet. Well, lest we forget, also, when you walk around the city, what do you see? A lot of pet spas. I mean, if you want to really treat your pet to these.
Oh, yes.
I mean, come on.
We never did any of
Our, our pets got treated by being movie stars. Our Labradoodle was gorgeous and very friendly. And she wound up being asked to have her picture taken in weddings in Central Park.
Oh, my goodness.
A foreign official once, at a UN meeting, because this is also whenever there's no COVID, this is the area, it's the center of the UN annual meeting where all the world leaders come and stay around us. And the cleaners in this area, it's their version of Black Friday. They make as much that week, they tell us, as they make the entire year. But in any event, we actually had a foreign minister of one of the stands ask if he could take pictures of our dog, if petting our dog, which apparently wound up on television in the stands.
Wow. Lou, you should put together a book of all these, stories, and you're an amateur photographer, and all the dogs, and I think that would make a bestseller, man.
Anecdotes, yes.
Right next to you going to the United States Supreme Court. I'd say that's a pretty nifty thing to do.
This is true.
It was a great experience. I think that if you want a story about America, it's how the major opponents in the United States Supreme Court case were a kid from West Virginia and some immigrants from Poland, which is great.
Wow.
Yeah.
Buy that book.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When you say you walk a lot, when you're going to some place that's not walking distance, what do you do? Do you get in the subway? Do you take a cab?
Well, there's a subway stop outside of our front door.
Oh my God.
I don't use that one because the stairs are a bit much for me, but I walk 6 blocks away to Rockefeller Center where there's an elevator. There are buses. We live on 6th Avenue. There are buses going up 6th Avenue and down 5th and 7th Avenue that can take us anywhere in Manhattan. I never took buses before we moved here, and we have one of the most intricate bus systems I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They're just amazing. We almost don't use cabs, or we never use Uber or any of that kind of stuff because we don't need it.
Now, in the event of people traveling, if you ever have to either pick them up or if you do travel, how long is the distance to the airports for our listeners?
Where we are, we're located. Well, of course, it depends on whether there's traffic. If there's not traffic, you can get to LaGuardia in about half an hour, and JFK within probably about 45 minutes, and you can get to Newark Airport within an hour. Now, that's, of course, without traffic. If you're going during rush hour, you double those times. But our friends, we don't pick people up at the airport. We offer to pay their taxi fares if they pick up a cab and come in, but they don't do that. We are within at least for us, walking distance of the Amtrak station and
Grand Central.
And Grand Central. But in terms of long distance train rides, we have several friends who come visit us by train. One of my friends, my only friend left from high school, walks up from Penn Station when she comes to visit. Other friends just grab a cab, and it's about a 10-minute taxi ride from the Amtrak station to our apartment.
Okay, wonderful. I wanted to ask also, in terms of moving or leaving your house in the Bronx, was that a difficult move psychologically and physically? I don't know how big your apartment is.
It's a 2-bedroom apartment. It was not a psychologically difficult move because I always wanted to live in Midtown. So it was a very eager move. In terms of, because I was paralyzed, I couldn't be doing very much moving at that time. So there's this wonderful thing called 1-800-GOT-JUNK. And just like the ads tell you, we called, they came, They cleaned the place out. And so we didn't have to go through all this emotional, will I part with it or not? They walked around with us, and unless we said don't take it, they took everything.
So I think the because we had relocated from Albany to the Bronx about 12 years before we moved to Midtown. We had done some downsizing then, and of course, our children are grown. We had, at their behest, moved some of their what we would call quote unquote treasured items from Albany to New York in the Bronx, and we had some. They both of our daughters had childhood memories. They had some toys from when they were children. They had papers and projects they had done from school. One of our daughters is a very talented artist. You can probably see, since we're recording this, but you can see behind me one of her posters. So we had a lot of their stuff as well as a lot of our stuff. So once we knew we were moving, we basically gave them several chances to come and sort through their stuff and decide what they wanted to keep and what they didn't. And one of the things that was kind of fun is that they had saved a lot of their childhood toys, thinking that, well, when they had children, they would love to pass these on to their kids. And one thing they discovered is that stuffed animals do not necessarily pass on very well because, of course, they were musty and dusty and well worn from their own use. So all the things that we had been carefully saving from them in those arenas, we got rid of. We have 3 granddaughters, and our kids discovered that none of our granddaughters enjoys dolls. So all the dolls that we had, but we did have a couple of items that they kept. Our daughters both had doll houses as children, and those they kept.
Wow.
And moved to their apartments. We had a couple of wooden toys. One daughter had a wooden barn that we had bought at a toy store in Vermont when she was about 2.5. That's still in our apartment. So, if we have young kids come to visit, which we do from time to time, we can drag these things out and let them play with those. And the paper stuff, we basically said, look, we're leaving on such and such a date. If this stuff ain't gone by then, it's going out. And so some of the stuff they just basically let us decide to get rid of. I think that's the biggest issue is if you are holding treasures for your children that somehow maybe you're having trouble parting with, but the kids are definitely having parting with. I think that was probably the most difficult. We moved a lot of our furniture, but not all of it, obviously. So we had to get rid of. I mean, obviously, living in a house, you have a lot more furnishings than you need for a 2-bedroom apartment. But we moved our living room. We moved a baby grand piano that was our kids' piano, and I'm learning how to play now. But we decided to keep that, figuring that maybe someday they or one of the grandkids would want it. And otherwise, couch, dining room table, we moved all that stuff.
The only traumatic thing for me was for a lot of reasons, I love history, and I also needed cane support for mobility reasons. And so I combined the two, and I had a cane collection of about 360 canes, mostly either antiques or carved.
Did you say 360 canes?
Yes.
That's what I said.
Yes.
Talk about taking advantage.
Wait, what did you do with those?
Well, I gave half of them to the New York Historic Society.
Oh.
And so when I miss them, I can go up and look at them. Because Barbara told me we weren't moving the cane. She was vicious and cruel about it. And we gave some canes away, but they weren't very good ones. But the remaining canes I've kept here. So in the room we're in right now, I still have about 120.
No way, Barbara! You keep over 100?
Yes, let me flash over, see if you can see. I don't know if you can see. Can you see? That's just half of them. That's half of them. And then the other half is on the other side of the other half is on the other side.
It's not nearly as impressive. When we lived in Riverdale, if you walked in, it was a center hall tutor. And if you walked in, you looked up the stairs, there was sort of this religious experience of all these canes staring down at you.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Alas, we've lost that.
You'll have to send us some pictures. We'll have to put it on in our show notes.
For our listeners, that struck me was the Queen of England cane.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, if you were looking over there, when you say the Queen of England, I'm looking right now at a Queen Elizabeth I, 3 Victoria canes, 1 Maggie Thatcher cane, Queen Elizabeth II's coronation cane. I have a wedding cane from Charles and Diana, which opens up for liquor inside.
Oh my God.
I believe when you go into something, you should go in all the way.
I agree.
I see that.
Man, I agree. Good for you.
The other thing about getting rid of stuff, we had several hundred books. We were lucky that we moved when we did, because now nobody takes books.
I know.
I mean, COVID notwithstanding, nobody wants books. But Lou had a colleague from work who was active in a church in Brooklyn. And he called up one of his friends. He talked to the priest, and they said, "Sure, we have we have sort of a lending library here, so we'll take all your books." We were very fortunate to find someone like that who was willing to take them, because they are impossible to get rid of now.
I have to tell you, by the way, you asked about the emotions of leaving. One of the things that made everything a joke for us is we hired a firm. I'll give them a little ad here. We hired a firm named Schleppers, which we hired only for the name. They turned out to do a wonderful job, but every time I saw the van out front, I just laughed myself to tears.
Yeah, I've seen Schleppers. That's so New York.
No,
it's so New York.
It's very New York. So that was, part of the process too. But, for us, the decision was not really traumatic. I mean, it was traumatic because of Lou's health situation, but we always knew we wanted to do this. And so we were able to accelerate the process for both of our qualities of life. The other thing it did was I was still working. It cut my commuting time in half moving here from the Bronx. And it certainly opened up a world of opportunity for Lou. So he was able to get out and
it was liberation and freedom.
Yeah, and being alone being in the suburbs when you're disabled is not fun, because you end up spending almost all your time in your house, in your yard. And for us, it was such a hassle at that point for Lou to get out and do things. Even going to a restaurant, and there were several in our community, was a big deal. So, it's just so much easier when you have all of these services and opportunities right at your feet. So I would heartily recommend it.
Also, by the way, there's an advantage of living in Midtown when you're an older guy with a disability, and I use either a cane or a walker. I love to go in the stores on Fifth Avenue, the carriage stores, because they all treat me like I'm a god. It's just great. Everybody does everything for me.
That is nice, right?
I go in not even to shop. I just go in occasionally for the fun of it.
Yeah, I remember when Gene was injured and he had a what did you have? That shoulder sling. He had a sling, and he was recovering, but we were at an airport, and the flight attendant said, "Sir, would you like to, board early?" And we were like, "Oh, we should start wearing
Sure.
But I want to mention that when we do declutter here, one of the struggles that I have, which is just a problem for Gillen, I suppose, is that I present these items to our son, who's now 21, and he'll respond with, "I don't need that. Just get rid of it." And then my husband and I, we look at each other and say, "Oh my God, he doesn't want this." And we're having trouble parting with it. But my issue is he may not want these items as a 21-year-old, but if and when he becomes a parent, his views might change and say, "God, why did you throw that out? My child would have loved that."
Yeah.
So I have this constant struggle.
My advice would be to get over it. We have a number of years on you, and we now have granddaughters who are teenagers. And after a while, you have to realize that if we waited 5 more generations, they might have wanted the stuff we were keeping. But neither our daughters nor our granddaughters show any real interest.
It seems that decluttering and shredding our unnecessary possessions is a big problem for everyone. So let's just agree on that. Barbara and Lou, we'd like to know, since moving to Manhattan, have you been hit with any surprises, anything that you did not expect?
Not for me.
No, I don't think. I think a couple of things. First of all, New York City is a city of neighborhoods, and I knew that before we moved. It's one of the ways that people sort of protect themselves from the greater mass, the overwhelming mass of 8.5 million people that you think about. And one of the things I think that did surprise me is that our building, we live in a large building. It's about 22 stories. And so there are about 700 apartments in it, something like that. Yeah, something like that.
320.
320 apartments, so maybe 700 plus people who live in it. Our building and even the surrounding areas is really a neighborhood. There are a lot more people who live really close to where we do. And I was kind of surprised about that, and how residential our particular neighborhood, which is on the office building complex and near Rockefeller Center and near Central Park and near shopping on Fifth Avenue. I never thought of it particularly as a place where a lot of people also live.
You get to know the restaurants. People are tourists are friendly. Occasionally I have fallen and people rush over and pick me up.
That's really nice. Yeah, you hear that about New York a lot. People just come together in the time of need, and that's wonderful.
That's right. And I think so. I think that was a surprise to me, was how residential it is and how friendly people are able to be when they don't have to keep their guard up about, well, we're in this large environment with all these strangers kind of thing. It's nice.
You even get to know the same homeless person who lives on the same corner for all 10 years.
Yeah, I think I probably told you this story, but we have a homeless, Gil and even before we retired, because I knew this story, that there's a guy who lives up in the next block who has lived on that block, literally lived on that block he's been there for the entire time we've been here, and probably has been there since before that. And Lou found out by talking to one of the merchants in that block that this guy used to teach at City Tech. I have never had the courage
to talk. So there's your future. You can always be homeless
yes.
in Manhattan.
Oh my God. Wow.
So
that is a small world.
It really is. And he clearly has some mental health issues. He doesn't speak to anyone. We sort of nod to him and acknowledge, we sort of acknowledge each other, but he's been there forever.
And he hangs outside some really good restaurants. So during the first 3 or 4 years we lived here, he put on a good 40 or 50 pounds. During COVID, he's been losing a lot of weight.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right, then. On that note, we want to thank you guys for taking the time out, sharing your story with us. This was super interesting. I certainly now have kind of changed my mind about leaving New York. I want to be able to open our windows and look at, either trees or the ocean, right. But it's just too hard to leave all this behind. And so maybe we'll do the, 2 homes situation, but I don't know.
Well, the nice thing about New York, I'll push it once again, is that there are places in the city where you can open your window and see trees or the ocean and or both.
That's true.
If you want to, forgetting COVID for a minute here, to be in a New England village or a Southern village, just go to City Island and have seafood.
Yeah. No. If I'm staying, it's Manhattan all the way, baby.
For those who don't know, City Island is in the Bronx. Little island in the Bronx.
But it's not Manhattan. Well, thank you again for all your time.
A lot of fun. Thank you. And yes. I admire both of you for having the imagination to put this whole series together. It's terrific.
Oh, well, we're honored. Appreciate your time. And hey, with guests like you guys, we'll learn more and help us in our personal decisions.
You guys are really informative. Thank you so much.
Very informative. Thank you. All right.
Welcome. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. We hope you enjoyed our show. If you know of someone who relocated for retirement and wishes to share their story, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. Our email address is gg@retirethere.com. Our website is retirethere.com, and you may follow us on Twitter @retirethere_. Don't leave out that underscore. And if you liked our show, please subscribe and rate it in Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate it. In the meantime, be well.